Boom, boom. All right, we're live across the interwebs. Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Event Icons. Man, what episode are we on? Like 1,000 bazillion episodes? You guys, I'm so excited for this week's episode. This week's guest is the only person when I've ever been speaking live ask a question and statement that literally had me speechless. Not like in a bad way, but literally I was just like, yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. I literally was ready to hand him the microphone and bring him up on stage. So you're not going to want to miss this week's episode. So let's dive on in. Let's launch that intro and get rocking and rolling.
Hey, it's time for another episode of Hashtag Event Icons, presented by Endless Events, the show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. Just follow us on social media to ask questions. Our iconic guests will answer them live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better the conversation. So please help share Hashtag Event Icons on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Just tell your friends to watch live on any of our social media channels. Now, without any further delay, this is Hashtag Event Icons.
All right. Like I said, this guest is absolutely awesome. The second we got a chance to meet, we were nerding out talking about events and strategy that I knew I just had to have him on the show. He's a self-described analog guy in a digital world, which I think so many people in the industry can definitely relate to, especially after being forced into virtual events. So I think this guest is going to absolutely blow your guys' mind. I don't want to talk anymore because he's got an awesome story and so much awesome stuff to talk about. Welcome to the show, Mr. Jim Kelley. Thank you so much, Jim, for joining us on Event Icons.
Hey, Will, you set the bar pretty high, but I appreciate it. Now I kind of feel bad. I asked that question.
Dude, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I just remember being on stage and being like, yeah, like, it was such a good point. We were talking, we were talking about event trends for next year and like the, strategy of where we're gonna go. But, we'll definitely get to, I think, a lot of that on this week's show. But before we get into it, though, like, Jim, you've been rocking and rolling in the industry for a long period of time. There's a reason why you're on this show. Can you tell everyone a little bit of the backstory, like what got you into the events industry?
Wow. So, they get started in college. I was active in student government and we got on the campus activities board and thought I wanted to go into college administration, be a director of student life, that type of thing. And went to work on my master's. And because I had not had much direction as an undergrad, my grades weren't the best. And so I got admitted into Syracuse University provisionally, which meant I had to take a couple of courses before they would let me matriculate into the program. But because of that, I did graduate, but I graduated off cycle, meaning I graduated in December. In higher ed back then, there were no jobs in December. Everything was kind of an August 1 to July 30th cycle, applied to the academic year. Moved home to Baltimore. Good friend of mine was working at the Hyatt Regency Baltimore, said they needed some help. Says, you understand business. And I ended up going down there and working, at the hotel and convention services and spent a number of years there. And at the time, the leading provider of services on the expo side in that market was a company by the name of Andrews Bartlett, who got acquired years and years ago. And they recruited me to effectively open the Baltimore office. And, 30 years later, here I sit.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's wild that you you pretty much got put right into like corporate convention meetings and then expo services, and like that's been your thing like for like so long. So many people I think like have hopped around. They're like, oh, I was in hotels and then I was in production and then I was in catering and all over the place. But you found your calling and you're at. I wanted to comment on the college life thing. I definitely relate to that. So a lot of people don't know this from my story, but like when I started the DJ company up, like I got really busy in college. So I got like very active in like Residence Hall Association, planning events on college campuses. Like there's something about planning college events that is just so electrifying and energizing,
So the irony is it's went full circle. So the very first convention I attended, it was either probably my junior year of college, was the National Association of Campus Activities.
NACA. Nice. Yeah.
They're now a client of Fern.
Oh, no way. That's
Yeah,
why that
yeah,
is full circle.
yeah,
That's full circle.
yeah,
Yeah. You know who is also really active in NACA is Bobby Dutton from Groove Boston.
yeah.
And yeah, he was one who I found about NACA and everything like that. But yeah, college events are it's fun. I think it's because like there's the like you the little bit of like the promiscuity of like college,
Right,
and
right.
but you don't have like it's not like the like too old where you're like I don't know, it's like it feels like there's just this freedom that you get when you get to plan these events that's like a whole different level.
Yeah, and there was a little bit of freedom, gave me a little bit of direction and guidance, and enough that it became a career path.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
That's probably the thing too. There's probably more money
right.
in it too than
Yeah,
probably like high school and younger
right,
events.
right.
Okay, so like you and I like nerd out a lot on like the
Yeah,
strategy and everything like that. And you made this really great comment about like, you know, our I think we both share the same belief of like event professionals kind of getting stuck as being the event planner, or being the event manager, or like being three layers down in terms of the leadership totem pole within a
right.
company. And you bring up this kind of good point about like the how they should interact with a C-level executive within a company. Can we dive on into back into that?
Yeah, and I'll go back to like I recall the context of the conversation we had at the program in DC, which I believe was a PCMA Capital Chapter program. And my comment was less about acquiescing to the C-suite and more about drive your way into the C-suite. I mean,
Mm,
what we do as event professionals has a significant impact on the strategy of organizations. Be it creating a sense of community, be it driving revenue. There's so much that happens from an engagement perspective that you need to be part of the conversation, right? It's the
mm,
single, for most associations, it's the single largest gathering of their membership and stakeholders. It's a big deal, right?
yeah, definitely.
It's a big deal. And I think that, sometimes we get caught up in the event professional part where we need to lean more into the business professional part. And I'm not
Mm.
diminishing what event professionals do, but there's a huge business component that adds significant value and can either make or break an organization in many, many ways.
Mhm. I like that too. Like I've been talking to Mark Killens about this idea that like instead of like being just like the event professional, you'd be like the CEO, the chief event officer,
Yeah.
right? Like you need to be like, yeah, you need to like be pushing for the element. Why do you think that you know, we're as event professionals, people are so afraid, I think, sometimes to move into that business services side of things. Why are we so comfortable with the event stuff, but then the second that you start using the word profit and loss statement, balance sheet, statement of cash flows, everyone's like,
Yeah.
ah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll say this. This is what I think, not what I know. Right. I think a lot of it, if you think about the makeup of an event professional, there's probably a very, very high level of a detail orientation
Mm.
and maybe less of a goal orientation.
Ooh. What do you mean by
Right.
that difference in those two? Like,
So, I mean, the event professionals that I know, they kind of dot the I's and they cross the T's, and they think of things from a detail perspective that I would never think of, right?
mm,
And I think at times what happens is you get so granular, right, that you think about that from a detail perspective that you're not looking 2 and 3 years out all the time from a business perspective. And I also think too, part of that is the way many organizations are structured. They're not inviting us as event professionals into the future strategy conversations. They come back and they say, this is what we'd like to do for next year. Right? You're not part of that conversation in designing things for the next year. We were just having a conversation with the client, and we were talking about their event, and I said, I'm interested in what you're doing next year, but I really want to know where you want to be as a brand and an organization 2, 3, 4 years from now. And I think the same thing as event professionals, we need to say, okay, what do we need to do next year to execute on what the business plan is for next year? But I need to understand where we're going as a business, okay,
mm,
in the next 3 to 5 years. because I may be able to implement and slip some things in as trial balloons to next year's event that can help that. Or I may be able to start to do some design components that help that, instead of saying, we're driving from Washington, D.C. to Seattle, Washington, but the only thing is like, okay, I need you to drive to Pittsburgh. Next, I need you to drive to Chicago, right? Next, I need you to drive to Denver, right? Because if somewhere along that line, there's a roadblock or a detour, you don't have a way to go around it because you don't know the final destination, right? If you're trying to go through Chicago and a storm hits and you just got to get to Chicago, that's the only thing you deal with. But if you know the greater destination, Seattle, you're going to go south, go around the storm, and keep on the path to Seattle.
Ooh,
I don't, does that make sense?
Yeah, like it's sometimes like they get so trapped into the short term thought process that they can't think of long term. I think another maybe great example of how this could be used is like you can think of your events as like a strategic element, like a source for your events in a lot of ways. Like I'm thinking, this, like we're at this point right now where like data is so valuable. We talk data, but no one realized like events are so rich with so much data that you could potentially tap into it even further. I'm not talking about just like, oh, we know what sessions people went to and things like that, but like, let's say for example, the strategy of the organization is launch a new product in 3 years. And maybe the goal is that like, hey, let's do a couple sessions at our user conference about that kind of product. Who shows up? What is do people like it? Is this something exciting? And you can then use it as a cue to say, oh, maybe we need to launch this product sooner, or yeah, we do want to do that product. Like it feels like that it sometimes gets forgotten too, that like there might be creative ways to utilize the events as well.
Yeah. No, I certainly think there's ways to drive business performance through events. And I will also say this, the event professionals have such a grounded perspective on what's real. And I think that I'm a big believer that the truth lies somewhere in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. To have this huge strategic plan that's completely impractical also hurts an organization, because then you get to this point of failure where everybody's saying, why didn't you hit that? But I think where having event professionals part of that strategy, they're going to say, you might want to pull that back a little bit because of this, or because of X, or maybe it's because of a contract of where they're going in a certain year. And you get that balance in the middle that actually helps you meet your goals and objectives and build on them in a way that you can continue to grow and evolve.
Oh, that's so smart. It comes to mind thinking about it, we've all had this conversation happen before, where like the CEO comes to like the initial meeting you have for an event, and their ideas are like, and we're going to do it at this hotel. It's going to be crazy and blah, blah, blah. And we go to ourselves and we look like, I've had so many times where we're like, well, yeah, okay, great ideas. And then we turn, we're like, they're absolutely crazy. They have no idea how this actually works. They're not, they're not a real event professional. They don't know what's going on, and I think your point that like the event professional can bring this realism mixed with the visionary pie in the sky kind of idealism of sometimes a CEO.
Yeah. And I think that's the business component of it. Right. And I, whether it be a for-profit event or, an association event, and, I always remind people that nonprofit is a tax status, right? And it's a tax status only. They still have to run a good business. Right? They still have to be effective with managing their cost and looking at things to grow revenue. Mm-hmm. And so, and any CEO, right, at the end of the day, that's how you impact the P&L. And I think, for event professionals to be part of those discussions earlier on and more consistently will help any organization improve from a business perspective.
So other than like getting involved in the conversation, what do you think are like if someone's listening to this right now, what do you think are like actionable steps that they can take to like move closer to that? Knowing what a P&L is and how it works, like what sort of like things would you say, like what do you think is the next step that you'd say like, hey, start doing this, start listening to this, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So early on in college, I had a professor that said, for the coursework, I remember he said, and I think at the time it was Newsweek in Time. He said, I want you to pick a periodical. Okay. And I'm showing my age. He says, I want you to subscribe to Newsweek or Time, and I want you to read it cover to cover, every single issue. Read the stuff you don't like. Read the stuff you're uncomfortable with. I read Time. I've had a Time subscription since my sophomore year, junior year of college. Okay. I read it cover to cover. Embrace the things that I'm uncomfortable with, because that helps me understand the greater good of the world, the greater universe from a business perspective. I think it makes me a better conversationalist. I can't go real deep into things, but I know a little bit about art, and I can talk to somebody about the Basquiat exhibit that's going on in New York right now, because I know a little bit about it. The same thing, I think, for event professionals. Listen to TED Business Podcast. Find a business newsletter that you would read, and again, not necessarily you have to agree with. One that I listen to is Scott Galloway. He's a little controversial at times, but when you peel back some of the rhetoric, there's some business aspects in there. And I think I think that we have some phenomenal organizations within our universe that teach about being a business event professional. I think where we lack is the knowledge to become a business professional. And I think you subscribe to the New York Times online. You can always find a minute between flights to look at that in the airport, and but read the business section. Don't go to the arts and lifestyle section necessarily. And I think I also think sometimes it's simply asking the questions of the peers within your organization. Sit down with the CFO and say, help me understand where my part of the organization fits into the overall strategy of the organization. I think, that's probably one of the things that I fear about virtual as it relates to employment, is the ability to go in and have those proverbial water cooler conversations with the other professionals, where you might pick up and learn things. But I think the short answer is, to your question, TED Talks are great. TED Business Hour is phenomenal. And I'll be happy to post in a chat, afterwards, or things that I read and the authors that I read and the books that I look at. And, some business periodicals, Forbes, Business Week. And, you got to read the stuff that doesn't interest you, and you got to read the stuff that makes you uncomfortable. That's the only way you get better.
I love it. I love the idea, you got to do what makes you feel uncomfortable in a lot of ways. Because a lot of times, I think that's just a mantra. Whether you you agree with this topic, or you're planning on becoming the chief event officer of your company, you got to do that to grow. Because I think if you always stay in your lane and you stick with what you're comfortable with, you will feel eventually you'll feel stale.
I've learned over time that I learn more from those who make me think hard and make me uncomfortable than those who make me feel good. Right? The people that question me and say, why are you doing that? Or that's not right. I don't like what you're saying. Because then you got to defend yourself a little bit, and you got to go back and you got to rethink it. Every time I've had that experience, I've grown. Every time I've kind of dealt with somebody professionally that just makes me feel good, I feel really good, but I haven't gotten any better.
Yeah.
And the analogy is, you see it all the time with if kids are in sports, right? You might get, they're nervous about moving up to the next level, and that's the only way they get better, right? You only get better when you play with people that are better than you, that can knock you around a little bit.
Yeah.
And, the sad part is, to some degree, intellectually, I like being knocked around a little bit, because I get better.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too, because you think to yourself too, some of the smartest people in the world, they probably are used to less intellectually challenging stimulations, but really probably the reason why they're so intellectually available is because they challenge themselves. It reminds me a little bit too that in a lot of ways we like people who make us feel good because it releases that dopamine, right? It's why we like posting a picture of ourselves on social media and then getting all those likes. But in reality, I bet if someone said, hey, post a picture of yourself and caption it, critique me
Yeah.
everyone would be like, no, no, whoa, I'm not ready for that, right? We'd have a painful experience doing that, right?
Well, just because, right? Like I go back to what happened when we first, had the encounter at PCMA. I
You
disagree
challenged
with
me
you to
for
some
sure.
degree. I challenged you, and just because you challenge someone or doesn't disagree with them doesn't mean you don't like them. They're different issues, and the reality is, we sought each other out afterwards,
Yeah, yeah,
because we wanted to kind of build on that.
yeah,
And we've
yeah.
had some nice conversations since then, and our relationship is growing, and it's, I mean, I think when you challenge someone, it actually really shows that you care.
Yeah, for sure. I will definitely. I mean, like, the cool thing about like how you challenged me too is like it was so respectful. Like I've had people sometimes challenge, but you can tell they're doing it just to like basically be a dick. Let's be honest,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And they're like, and you're like, you literally are just trying to flow with the conversation. You're trying to show off. And I remember you asking the question, and I remember at first I was just like. I was like, oh, this guy, oh, I'm getting one of those guys. But then I remember like the way you presented it, by the time you wrapped up your question in our
Yeah.
conversation we had on stage, I was like, oh no, like this was super respectful. And I was like, I totally respect this guy. And like, I had actually, that's why I was like, almost, I wanted to bring you the mic because I was like, I feel like you are going to make my presentation better by being here talking with me about this.
Well,
And I think we need more of that in our lives, so many ways.
yeah, I think we need, right. I mean, we need a lot more of it in our lives. I mean, respect is huge.
Mhm.
I also think in the event business, it's incredibly, incredibly valuable. I mean, there's a lot of tension, and tension in the sense of deadlines, and like I always say, like, we don't get paid as event professionals when things go right. We get paid when they go wrong, right?
Mhm.
The reality is, if we wrote down a run of show, a list of orders, and everything went well, at that point, anybody could do the on-site execution,
Yeah,
right?
true.
If everything showed up on time, if all the labor was there, if all the attendees did what they said they were going to do and they behaved right, being an event professional on site would be really, really easy. The reality is that doesn't happen. And the tension occurs in many cases. And that's where I think you have to have the respect for each other. You have to respect the fact that I can say something to you very curtly, but it's because there's a sense of urgency and that,
Mhm.
you don't take it personally. And there's also a level of trust. Hey, here's the situation. Here's what I'm going to do. What are your thoughts? Yes or no? Go with it. Right. And then at that moment in time, you do the best that you can. Right. Nobody ever wants to fail. Nobody ever does anything with ill intent. I'm a strong believer in that. And that becomes an issue of respect and appreciation of that person's knowledge and level of professionalism. And if it doesn't work, you download afterwards and say, ooh, hindsight being what it is, probably would have done this differently.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, that's a big piece of it. I remember years ago having to make a client's business available to the open market again because they did not respect our team.
Oh,
And
wow.
I wasn't going to have them disrespect our team because it put the team in a bad place that impacted other clients.
Totally. Totally.
And
I
it's
say life's too short to work with people you don't want to work with, right?
yeah,
It's a good point too. Like we kind of have that like a rule within our company too. It's like, look, if a client's like such a nightmare to work with, like we will happily fire the client. Like,
yeah,
and I know for a lot of people who maybe are listening to this early on in their careers, they're like, oh my gosh, firing a client, I need that money, blah, blah, blah. But every single time I've ever done it, there's always a client right behind them. Like
yeah.
there's it's not like oh, immediately you get a call the next day. But sometimes, yeah, maybe takes a month or something like that. And you go through a little bit of struggle, but then something will get way better. But, right now in the events industry, there's so much change happening and, everything like that. You need that and those people that you can work with, really.
Well, I think also too, right now more so than ever, you have to think about, if I don't take an action with that client, am I going to lose staff?
Mm.
And then what's the trickle down impact? Because is that staff member now connected to other clients
Mm-hmm.
that you create a situation? And look, I mean, our biggest challenge across the organization right now is talent.
Mhm.
And, I think we've, got to hold on to that, give people great career opportunities. But I think that's the other part of it. And I think that's where the business aspect that comes in. You look at, what's the short-term impact versus the longer term impact for the organization.
I like it.
You
Do
know,
you what's your thoughts? This just kind of came in my mind in
yeah,
terms of like challenging to like get to that next level as an event professional. Do you think that it's wise that as an event professional, it sometimes makes sense to like, hey, you've kind of like if you feel like you've reached like the top end of your planning career, your event planning career, whatever it is, to maybe go over to the marketing side or maybe go to like another part of the business just to at least get exposed to more parts of the business activities? Or do you think that it's wise for them to stay within the event part of the role? And let's assume this means also to other organizations too, like
yeah,
because obviously if you feel stuck within your current
right.
organization, it makes sense to move inward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more you know, the better you become. So when my career started on the contracting side, I was producing events. Okay, I was producing events. I was, writing the work orders. There on site. Then I moved into sales. Okay, I was a better salesperson because I knew how things got produced. Okay,
You knew the operation side.
right, and then I progressed into a marketing role. And I think the key to any success I've had on the marketing side is a result of understanding what the salesperson is dealing with,
Hmm.
right? So I think that makes you more well-rounded as a professional, and it makes you see the other aspects of the business. I certainly would, encourage growth. Um, and I think too, that's part of when you're having those conversations with your employer. Part of that is understanding where they see you going and where the opportunities might be, so that you can become, a more well-rounded professional and grow. But absolutely, I think that getting out of the operations side into the marketing side or the sales side might not be your forever home.
Hmm.
But if you decide to go back into an operations role at a higher level, I think it makes you that much better.
Totally.
You
Totally.
know,
Okay, I got
right?
a hard
Yeah,
question for you
yeah,
that might be like timely. We're kind of getting out of this like the pandemic and all this change has happened in the industry, and I sense that within the industry everyone feels at least a little bit burnt out. I
yeah,
think anybody who's like, oh, I'm completely thriving, like I'm the happiest I've ever been, I think they might be kidding themselves in some way.
yeah,
So let's say, for example, you've reached this point in your career where you know a lot of what you want to know and you're like you feel like you've kind of got that level and you know that you need to grow but you're burnt out.
yeah.
What would you say to somebody who's burnt out but they logically know they need to keep growing or anything like that?
So, first thing I would do is talk to the organization that you're with, and just say that you're feeling burnt out. I've two people that I know in the DC market that have done that. One was ready to take another job, and one basically said they were leaving their organization just because they were burnt out and they needed a break. Both those organizations gave them sabbaticals of different length
Hmm.
and said, we value you, okay, and as a result of that, we want you to take some time off. Not then reevaluate your decision with a clearer head.
Hmm.
It's really hard, you know, in the season, right? And on the trade show side and contractor side, we do have seasons, right? We're wrapping up, kind of coming to an end of a busier season. The reality is, the end of December through January is not a ton of busy. Somebody says that to you in October, yeah, it could be burnout.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, I think there needs to be more of those just conversations. Just go talk to your employer, go talk to the organization that you're with, and don't abandon them.
Mhm.
And then I do think sometimes it just might require a change of scenery, and that's just the reality. And if you really feel there's nowhere to go and there's no growth opportunity or no relief, if the company has a history of not having backup plans or slow hiring plans, I think at first you do have to come to a position where you do what's best for yourself, because otherwise you're not going to be, good to your employer.
Mhm.
You're not going to be, good to your stakeholders you deal with. And you're also not going to be good to your family and loved ones. And that doesn't do anybody, any good at the end of the day.
That's true.
And, and then I think too, you run the risk of potentially damaging your reputation, not to
Mhm.
mention potentially doing physical harm to yourself.
Yeah.
So,
I
yeah.
love that thought that like we need to explore and think of ourselves as long-term assets within an
Yeah.
organization, right? Like this is, I think, like I'm millennial generation, so
Yeah.
like we typically get labeled as we're gonna be here for a year and then we're gone. And I
Right.
think like because everybody's kind of perpetuated that thought process, everyone just assumes that everyone's gonna be there for only a year and then they're
Yeah.
gone, right? And like velocity between jobs is gonna be higher than ever. But in reality, it's like I think sometimes like even within small organizations, like if you have that conversation, you say like, look, like I'm burnt out. I just like maybe we need a break or maybe I need to figure out a way. Like, yeah,
Right.
let's figure out a way. I would rather as an employer figure out a way to like design it where I'm like, hey, let's give you a sabbatical. Yeah, it's gonna hurt in the short time because this person's gonna get more busy or
Yeah.
whatever it may be. It's gonna suck. But at the same time, like, look, I want you to be back here in a year or 6 months, whatever it is. And like who knows what can happen. Like I feel like that's one of the biggest challenges within employership right now moving
Yeah.
forward is just this like this perpetuating thought that like, hey, no one's really wants to be here for 10, 20, 30 years that,
Yeah.
I know my older generations have usually been.
Right. Yeah. But I think in the end, it goes back to that respect. You
Yeah.
you need to be respectful enough of the people that you're working for to have those conversations. And the other things I kind of always focused on in my career is, transparency, truth, and trust. If you take a path of transparency, if you're truthful and you trust the other individual, then you're usually going to end up in a good place.
Yeah.
Right. And so you want to give those three when you're dealing with others, right? You want to be transparent in what you can do. You kind of want to be truthful on the timeline, all right? And you want to trust that they're going to respect your decision. But coming back, you need transparency on what the budget is. What are the decision making process, and the same applies. If you look at those three factors and you apply them, I think generally you'll end up in a pretty good spot.
Mm-hmm. I like it.
And I think about it too. I mean, I think about the event business and I think the crush of the moment, right? I mean, there has to be transparency on what can be done and not be done. And you got to kind of be truthful about the timelines and the scenario. And there's got to be mutual trust that, we're all pushing for the same goal and the same, mutual positive attendee experience, right? Because really that's the common denominator. What's that event experience, be it a virtual event or a live event, and how does that reflect on the brand?
I like it.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna kind of oh man, perfect question coming on in. I was literally just about to post and say, by the way, if you have any questions at all, feel free to ask them, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever it may be. And right as I did that, I got a wonderful question in from T. Scorman Productions. I'm hoping this is Paul from T. Scorman Productions. That question says, love the great insight on the idea of the sabbatical and renewal within an organization. I found them very, very helpful within our organization as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want this to get posted and then I become the guy that's, responsible for all these people going to ask for sabbaticals. But part of it is if somebody's really burnt out and they need 30 days, realistically, are you going to find a new hire in 30 days?
No way. No.
Right? Give them their 30 days, work it out so it works within your organization and the business flow. because by the time you post the job, you do a couple interviews, and you're onboarding, I'm pretty sure, that it's going to be more than 30 days.
For sure. If you're doing a good interview process, it's
Yeah.
going to take like 60 to 90 days, it
Right.
feels like. And if
Right.
it, and like we're feeling it, unless like we're having trouble filling some positions. It's like we had like a position open for like a year before we could fulfill it. So it's like, yeah, definitely like have those conversations and see what it looks like. Oh, hey, I'm not getting as much value from it.
I call BS. I don't. Why would people not want to come work with you?
I do. I think the thing was we were so particular about what we wanted for the role. Like, I had this like dream position. It was within a role that I like worked really, really closely with. I built a lot of their processes and stuff. And it was just, I think the thing was that like I had such a different expectation of what I wanted. So
Yeah.
I had to, I think over time, like loosen up what I wanted, be more open to things. And also too, like, I'm definitely feeling as an organization leader right now, it's like the market and compensation shifted. Like it was funny because we knew it was gonna shift and we were already like shifting all of our compensation up. But like, so I think so much of the conversation's like at this really weird flux right now too. So that's, I think, the two mixes of why it ended up happening. But we like to be a good place to work as well. So okay, so I got a question I want to pose to you. So Jim, you saw my 2023 like trends presentation, which we're going to be releasing our blog with all the details on it soon. But so you got like a sneak peek into it. What if you had to pick one trend for next year that you think is going to hit the events industry? Give me your like the one that you think that no one's thinking about.
Wow. I
put you on the spot.
I I don't know if there's a if it's a trend, but I see we're going to lean a little bit more into analog. I think that I will say this. I'm not against digital or virtual. I'm kind of for face-to-face in-person experiences, right? I'm a big believer not to be against something, but to be for something, right? I think there's going to be just a lot more kind of focused around how can we create those better one-to-one experiences, create events where there's actually the white space to allow people to connect, right? I think that the trend is, I don't think you're going to see an event that has people scheduled with content from 7:30 to 5:30, and then a reception that starts at 6:00, right? I think you're going to see white space in the day by design, right? And I think what happens when you build that white space in the day, and I know I've got 2 hours to do something that there's nothing planned, or maybe even 3 hours, I actually will become more engaged in those other components of the meeting, because I know there's a time for me to go answer that email. I know there's a time for me to go grab Will and have a cup of coffee and say, well, let's blow off that session that's occurring from 10 to 10:45, because there's going to be time. And I think that's going to create actually more engagement. And I think there's going to be a much, much stronger focus on that. It's kind of the less is more type scenario. Well, I don't know if you know this, but you kind of locked up and are frozen. I think
Streamer had some issues there for a split second.
My comment was so impactful that I just shocked you into
it. Just knocked my internet right off. No, I think that like it's so smart that like we need to be thinking about that white space element that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Like I think that we get obsessed that if we have an all-day event or a 3-day event, that means that we have to dominate all 3 days and jam as much stuff in as possible. But in reality, like I'm a big advocate right now of like let's make events more simple. Let's have less content. So then, more white space. Let's let people have a 3-hour lunch gap so they can go off site. They can really have a great. I hate the you have 1 hour for lunch. Yeah. You lose 15 minutes walking there. You go have lunch. You're cramming in 30 minutes, and then you got 15 minutes to walk back. Like it's too much. It feels like that we're trying to overplan events sometimes.
Well, I think too that and I think about it in the context of that's not what people's normal day is like, right? Right? You don't. Most people don't kind of get up at the crack of dawn to get to that 7:30 breakfast every single day,
Yeah.
and be fully engaged, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the other part. Like they might get up, but to intellectually be fully engaged, attend things all day, then turn around and go to a reception or something, and basically be on for, 10 to sometimes 12 to 14 hours, right?
Yeah. Wow. Never
So
thought about
you don't do that in your normal day, yet you're inviting people to an event, you're asking them to do that, and you expect them to be fully engaged, and they've traveled, they're flown, they're sleeping in an uncomfortable spot.
that. Mm-hmm.
There's just some basic like physical attributes that it just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You kind of gotta adjust a little bit. And I think to be more conscious of that, where a less is more is actually going to create a higher level and more significant level of engagement.
I love this thought you have around the breakfast thing
Yeah.
too. Like, I never thought about this. Yeah, like you make everyone get there 7:30 because you want them all to be online by like 9 a.m. to be inside the general session. But like most of the time when we wake up, like I don't know about you guys, like I slowly get out of bed. I barely go to the shower. But like you make me wake up at 7:30 a.m. That means I gotta wake up at 6 a.m. I gotta go. And then the worst part is like we think to ourselves, yeah, well maybe someone does eat breakfast at 7:30 a.m. or they can skip it. But the problem is like you're then creating a social dynamic. And I never thought about this. Like you do the breakfast downstairs. When I normally eat breakfast, I'm on my phone. I literally go get I eat, and I literally don't talk to anybody, and I just eat by myself. And it's my chance to catch up on news and read all the periodicals that I need to. Right? Like, man, I never thought about the fact that like we make people be on it.
Yeah.
Just so hard when it comes to our events, let alone just the time commitment of stuff.
Correct. It's a lot, and it's gonna take some shifting, but I think we're at the place where we're more open to do that as an industry. I think we need to do that as an industry to stay engaged and to continue to add the significant value that we do. I think that we're one of our customers is IDSA, the Infectious Disease Society of America, and the group was recently in DC. And went down there, and I saw the Moderna booth on the floor. Dr. Fauci was at attendance, and I thought about the fact that it was one of those, wow, I forget about this. The meetings and events that we're a part of in this industry make meaningful changes that impact the world. Mm-hmm. Right? The people that were at the forefront of the science of the pandemic and the forefront of the science of the vaccination were in that building all at the same time, right? Meaningful contributions that have impacted us all, right? Yeah. And that happens across so many industries that real knowledge is shared, real business deals are made, and people's lives are impacted in a truly meaningful and positive way through the events and the work we do. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. We get caught up in we're very fortunate. We travel to places that I travel to places that as an Irishman, I probably wouldn't be let into, And I have to tell you, I think sometimes we take that for granted. We focus on that, yet we forget about the real meaningful work. I saw, and I know this was in jest to some degree, but it bothered me. I saw a post from IMAX that somebody got invited to an event, mm-hmm. and they used the hashtag "My life is better than yours." Oh. And I'm thinking, like, how pretentious is that, mm-hmm. right? Like, mm-hmm. we should be so grateful about the things we have as an industry. And let's focus on the meaningful impact that we have in changing people's lives, as opposed to that we got to go to a concert and, bragging about it in a manner that makes us look a little bit entitled.
That's true.
You know,
Like
not
you joke about like the hotel aspect. Everyone's like, "Oh,
yeah,
I didn't get the suite. My
yeah,
food didn't come on time. Oh, how dare!" Like for some people, this is like, if that happened to them, they'd be like, "Oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it."
yeah,
We definitely are very, very blessed as an
yeah.
industry.
Yeah, and I think I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that we're doing meaningful work.
Hmm.
The gathering of minds and the intellectual conversations that we occur, and that truly makes impact.
It's true.
In so many ways,
So true. So true.
and I hope we never lose that.
I couldn't agree anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
All right,
yeah.
so I think sounds like a good point to start to wrap up on.
Okay,
So I want to go into my last like
yeah.
two questions that I ask every
I'll let you have
single
three if
guest.
you want.
Okay, maybe if I get a third in there, I might slip one in. All right, so first let's start off with like you start naming some good stuff in the beginning about
Yeah,
like Scott Galloway is a great resource. I'm a huge Scott Galloway fan, love him.
yeah,
Talked about like all have these business prior articles. So you seem like you're a resource guy. So I think this is
yeah.
gonna be a perfect question. What are your like favorite like tips or tools, apps, technologies? What are your favorite resources? Everything that you do, like what's your favorite things to read, things to get things done, all that sort of stuff.
So what's funny is let's start with reading. Um, I'm a self-proclaimed keynote junkie.
Oh,
So
okay.
I love a good keynote. I don't know why. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
so. I know PCMA is coming up in January. Um, I'll probably leave there and come home and order books by the 3 or 4 keynotes that they have, right? And
Nice.
build on that. That's kind of where I get my library from a little bit. I listen like, wow, that was a great speech, and I'll listen to that keynote. Um, I Adam Grant, Simon Sinek, are two that I really listen to. I just listened to a podcast from Simon Sinek, and now I'm drawing a blank now that I'm in front of the microphone. And I ordered the book following the podcast.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but I mentioned TED. For years, my dream is at some point, maybe it's my, retirement gift to myself years down the road to actually go to the TED conference.
Oh, you got to do it. We just
I
had Monique on the show.
Yeah.
She can make it happen. I'll make that introduction happen.
But I subscribe not just to the TED podcast, but I buy the virtual subscription every year.
Oh, nice.
Right? And I, listen to it. And again, I kind of just let it queue up for me to some degree what I'm listening to. Back to that thing that I said earlier, how do you connect the dots, right?
Yeah.
And get more comfortable. From the other thing that I bought recently that I'm absolutely in love with, that I wish I would have found later, I bought one of those Remarkable pads.
Oh, yeah.
Right. It's changed my life.
Yeah.
It's changed my life in so many ways.
For those who are listening right now, a Remarkable Pad's like it's kind of like an e-ink like Kindle display, so it doesn't use a lot of power. But then you can like draw on it like an iPad and everything like that as well. It's not meant to consume, but more they're like write, correct?
Right. But that's the reason I like it, because I had a writing app on my iPad, but then I would say, "Oh, I'm going to look at this, at this, and look at this," and next thing I know, I'm taking notes. But I end up looking at TikToks because it's just so limited, right? It's basically writing in PDFs.
Yes.
That's all you can do on it. It's really kept me focused. I don't have all these journals lying around anymore because I do a lot of writing.
That's awesome.
I love that. I think it's incredibly adds a level of efficiency, right? And that's so it's an analog practice digitally.
Yeah,
so it's perfect for me.
Yeah, it's perfect. Perfect.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah. So I think, did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, those are great.
Yeah.
I think you're the first person to mention the Remarkable. I see it like everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
I think Kindle, Amazon Kindle just came out with like a writable version to kind of compete with the Remarkable, but I haven't seen which one's better quite yet. I don't know if the Kindle's even physically out yet, but I've nerded out. I'm like, oh, I kind of want, it's one of those things I'm like, oh, I kind of want it, but I have to, me, I do my presentations on my iPad. So like I gotta get used to using my Apple Pencil more often before I spend another like $200 on a new tablet thing.
And I would say, there's one other thing I listen to that for those that know me well, my habit and my passion is bourbon. I love bourbon. I love the story of bourbon. I love the connection with U.S. history and bourbon. But there's actually a couple podcasts that I listen to. One is Bourbon Pursuit. And one of the things that I really take away is they focus on community, and it's truly a community. And I a lot of times I'll be listening to that, and I'll be drawing parallels in my mind to what we're doing as an industry, as a community, where we're lifting people up. We're trying to help people that are new to things, right? Like you'll see posts all the time. Okay, I'm just getting into bourbon. What are 3 that I should try? And nobody says, you're a rookie and you shouldn't do this. But they say, hey, why don't you try these? This is what I found. And it's all about building people up in a sense of community. So I listen to it and I laugh and I say to myself, oh, we can draw some parallels to as we build communities professionally and help each other grow and crowdsource content and provide resources.
Okay. I love it. I love it. Okay. Last and final question I get for you.
All right.
I don't know if I'm gonna have a third for you. So, what's your number one tip that you would give our audience today?
Wow. Believe in yourself. Absolutely believe in yourself. I think that's it. Believe in yourself and surround yourself with people that believe in you.
Okay.
And if you do that, there's no stopping you.
I love it.
And,
I love it.
Yeah.
Wow.
No.
Jim, this was such an awesome episode. I was telling everybody, or telling Jim before we got on, I didn't really have a topic planned. I was just like, let's just go for it and see where it kind of takes us. And I even took away a ton of things as part of this conversation. So thank you so much, Jim. This has been just such an awesome episode.
No, well, thanks for having me. It's an honor. Look, I've been very fortunate in this industry, and if I can do anything in any little way to give back and pay it forward, I think we all have a responsibility to do that. And I know what I said might not be for everybody, but if a couple people take a couple nuggets and can, improve themselves, then I think it's a win all around. And I have to say, I appreciate, us getting to meet face to face in DC and the relationship that we're building for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree anymore. Couldn't agree anymore.
Yeah.
And also thank you to our audience as well for watching, listening, asking the questions. Shout outs to T. Scorman for asking that awesome comment and question and joining us as well. But for everyone who's watching right now, make sure that you check out event-icons.com so you don't miss these conversations live. But I think it's our time to get out of here, Jim, wouldn't you say?
I'm good with that. Yeah.
All right, everybody. Have a great day. And thanks so much, everybody, for tuning on in.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #Event Icons. To catch all of the bonus content, resources mentioned, and an invite to our Facebook and LinkedIn groups, head to www.event-icons.com. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway, and just tag your social media posts with #Event Icons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again soon, right here on #Event Icons.